why is that grain-fed cattle may have a different organoleptic properties that are more like grass-fed, or the cattle have been fed with forage? Or will you please tell us a little bit more about that, if you will?
Yeah, that's really a good topic. Here in the last, I would say in the last 3 years is when we've really been putting a little effort into it. And it's really funny because we were just talking about South America, or the Southern Hemisphere, and the individual that got our lab switched away or to include beef color was a Chilean visiting scientist, and he's the primary author on this paper. And he came up to me after I talked at the International Congress of Meat Science and Technology, and of course he spoke Spanish, but he was speaking to me in English, albeit it was more like Spanglish. And he said, Dr. Gerrard, I've got to come work in your lab. And I didn't understand about half of it, but I love folks from different countries. I think it brings a lot of diversity to the program. And I go, sure, what do you want to study? He said, I want to study beef quality. And I go, I don't know anything about beef quality, or beef color, excuse me. And so I think if numbers are right, it's like $1 billion loss, just the color of beef. I don't hold me to those numbers, but it's a pretty large number. And so we started to talk about it. And of course, in the Southern Hemisphere, they feed it's forage-based feeding. It's not, you know this better than I do, Francisco, right? And so, of course, you always blame dark beef on stress or age or genetics or what else affects it. But I don't think anybody thinks about how they're fed. And so in a paper that we worked with Susan Duckett, another outstanding meat scientist from Clemson, she's been studying organoleptic properties of grass and grain-fed beef for years. Outstanding scientist. Anyway, I called her and, I've got this visiting scientist in my lab. I got to have samples to do something. We work in pork, right? Or that's where we started working. And I said, Susan, do you have any samples? And so I told Ariel and I were talking one day, and I said, man, the way you manage these cattle has to have an effect on the color. I said, it's not all dark cutting as we know it, because dark cutting is a stress-related phenomena where you don't have any energy in the muscle and the pH doesn't ever go down, right?
Right.
So she sent us a bunch of samples, and we ran the myoglobin content, which is a major pigment, right, as you know. And these cattle that were grass-fed had a significant amount of myoglobin, more myoglobin in them. So if you got more myoglobin, you got a darker red, right? Now, I think one of the Emeriti there at K-State might argue a little bit about that. But the fact of the matter is myoglobin concentration does change between livestock. And these pHs were the ultimate pH of the meat was the same, but the myoglobin concentration was higher. So it argues that grass-fed beef is a little darker. We have a study with our colleagues in Brazil. They've done nearly the exact same thing, probably a little bit more detail, and they've gotten the same results, right? And their study was a little bit better designed because they did grass and grain, but then they did grass and grain at the same growth rate. So you could look at, well, is it just the forage or is it the growth rate? And Salo da Silva, which you may know at the University of Sao Paulo, they've got data that support that study. So I think there's little question that while dark cutting is still an issue, in other words, if you stress an animal and they go dark, that's truly the case, but it's not the only way to get dark beef.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. This is pretty valuable. But I guess I'll follow up on that, and I think just to make it more into context,